To the business school. I am Theodor Cojoianu. I am an associate professor in sustainable finance here. I have like Richard, I'm also an alum of this university, so I have the privilege of teaching in the course I graduated from, and I hope we'll have all of you, hopefully we can welcome you on the campus more, also extending the invitation to Richard that we foster these connections and we build each other in a way, learn from each other on the intersection of natural capital, finance, and climate change. As we're having, we're delighted to announce that we will have a 1.4 million grant from the EU, which will be about biodiversity finance. So we're looking to build a bit of a center between geosciences, the business school, informatics, and bring this agenda all together. So we'd love to work with you. I have the deep privilege to serve on the EU platform on sustainable finance, which is currently putting together what's called the green taxonomy. So it's looking across the 6 environmental objectives: climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, water, pollution, and circularity. They're trying to define how each company can be broken in a lot of different economic activities and try to understand how companies impact these environmental objectives. I just want to reflect a bit. I just want to give you a bit of an inside view from also what's happening in the platform. In a few weeks, you'll see the platform releasing the technical screening criteria for biodiversity for different economic sectors. So you will know, for example, how to do afforestation that's not just good for the climate, because if you tell an ecologist you're just going to put a bunch of trees and that's good for biodiversity, they'll probably laugh in your face, right? You need to have quite a big plan on how to do, for example, restoration that is, for example, natural deforestation has to be good for the climate, but you need to have a lot of factors into consideration when it comes to biodiversity. And so that will be coming out. But I just want to reflect that the platform and the technical experts themselves have a bit of an inertia from the way they think about climate. And unfortunately, I must say, they're trying to apply it to biodiversity, which doesn't really work in most of the time. The reason being, first of all, we don't have a unifying metric for biodiversity. As we've seen Tom just presenting quite a few of them. We don't have the tons of CO2e when it comes to biodiversity. We have a whole bunch of things we need to keep in mind. And we need to educate businesses, we need to educate executives to be able to engage with this theme, which is really hard to do because it's really hard to sell to your boss what biodiversity is if you can't really explain it. With climate, most people can explain a ton of CO2e in the atmosphere. So this study is really trying to understand I'm grateful to have really great authors. Sergio, for example, is the former National Secretary for Biodiversity for Brazil. He was in charge of the legislation for the Amazon. There's myself and Francisco, who is also natural capital scientist and also finance scholar, and August, who's an alum of the carbon finance program. So what we really wanted to do with this study is very simple, is to look at the global equity markets. You have about 10,000 companies worldwide that are listed, that are usually the targets of the pension funds that Richard was talking about, and say, are they really concerned about biodiversity? You'll see we have a really binary metric. Do they even talk about it? And we'll see how many of them are concerned about it. And equally important, we wanted to classify them in the types of biodiversity impacts and dependency risks that they're actually exposed to. Now, as you will see, the framing of this is about the risks. So financial risks. We had the comment from the gentleman here, unadulterated capitalism. A lot of the interest is around financial risk, right? Around materiality. Does this impact the bank loan that I'm giving out as a bank, right? But a lot of it is also about impact that society is concerned with. And we tolerate a lot of impact as society. Well, unfortunately, when you have a mining company going into a protected area and we say we want that lithium that Richard was talking about, we're actually tolerating the risk that they're going to blow up the entire protected area because we want the lithium. And so that's a big impact. And what we want to do is discuss a bit about dependencies, impact, and how these could translate into financial risks and whether executives care about these things. And so really what we show through this paper is that we have about 55% of the globally listed companies don't have even a biodiversity policy, like even a greenwashed policy, okay? So even if you try to do something and say, look, we care about protected areas, they don't even mention that, right? So we have about 7 trillion listed at the moment on equity markets that is completely oblivious to this type of agenda. And so that's really our starting point. And if you look at the numbers, it's roughly about 30% of it, is really doing something or starting to articulate why they think biodiversity is important to their business model. It's really great that you guys set up the discussion really well for me so that I can draw. We had the feedback loop comment, which I think is really important. And conceptually, we need to be able to map these feedback loops. The problem is, as Richard said, we don't have the data sets to actually even map them. So although you might be aware of a feedback loop, then you can't do anything about it because you can't design a process about it, and it's not resource efficient. But we built this model based on the Encore database. A lot of you may know about it. If you don't know about it, what's really great, they're looking at these biomes, the natural capital assets and ecosystem services. And they say, look, each sector of the economy maps in a very nice way to these ecosystem services. And so they, in that way, define these dependencies, which they split into direct physical inputs. This is really easy to understand. Pretty much if you're if you're IKEA, right, you're dependent on basically your forests, right? So that's direct input. Then you have what are called enabling processes. So pollination, enables, for example, some types of agriculture to flourish. Then you have what is called protection from disruption. So you can have pest control, right? Depending on what you plant, right? You could reduce, for example, pest control and so on. And last but not least, there's some type of dependency which is called mitigating direct impacts. So if you're a mining company and you're putting some, let's say you have a spill somewhere, your soil can filter that, and by the time it gets to the groundwater, you have less of impact, right? Because your soil has provided like a filtration function. So that's kind of a mitigating direct impact. And a lot of these companies don't really value that type of benefit that nature provides, right? So we don't currently account much for that. What we do a lot is this part on the impact side. So you'd have a lot of mining companies basically being worried because they're trying to mine somewhere and everyone says don't mine in a protected area. And so we had the point on agriculture, right? You drive deforestation, for example, in the Amazon. Again, people tend to talk a lot about that, but we don't nearly talk as much about dependencies. So let me just tell you briefly what we've done and what the results are. I won't get too much into the statistical model. I'll just send you the paper. But in essence, you can go, there's most of major data providers. So Bloomberg, you can also do it with S&P with Sustainable One data. You can do it with most of the mainstream data providers. You can check the types of biodiversity policies listed companies have. So we extract this data point from Bloomberg. Does the company have at least one biodiversity policy? And then we take this Encore database and we map it to the different companies depending on their sub-industry sectors. So I know if you're a mining company, you would likely, care a lot about impact. But if you're agriculture, and depending on the type of agricultural products that you would have, you can map it to, direct impacts, or you could say, you have that pest control function and so on. So we're able to map dependencies and impacts to the different sub-industries, right? So you can have for each company, you can say you're more exposed to dependencies versus impacts, right? And so I won't go through the Encore data set, but I will, because I don't have enough time. I think I have another 5 minutes. And so I would encourage you to to look at it because they take this materiality view as well. So it is a tool that was developed for the banking sector, and we've kind of adopted it to work for listed equities as well. And in principle, you can map this exposure of natural capital assets and ecosystem services to different businesses at a very granular level. It is a static mapping though, because it's just a conceptual mapping at this stage. If you want to understand how a company or economic activity impacts biodiversity and how that translates into material financial impact for investors, you have what's called SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. So they've tried to standardize some biodiversity metrics that companies need to disclose. You will have, of course, TNFD, so we have that addition. And Encore themselves have now released, I believe, this year, an impacts mapping as well, not just dependencies into their tool. So I'll let you to check it, but basically the takeaway is the following: you have about 10% of large globally listed companies that are exposed to what we call impact on biodiversity. So this is like a mining company, but then you have a much bigger set of companies that are actually exposed to dependency risk. So basically, you have more companies like IKEA's, right? And you have maybe like Glencore or Rio Tinto that impact biodiversity directly. If you look in terms of numbers, we're talking about 5.2 trillion of enterprise value. When I say enterprise value, that means share price plus the debt outstanding. So it's both equities and bonds. So 5 trillion of investor money is usually exposed to these companies that have a big impact, whereas we're talking about 20 trillion, right? So 17% of globally enterprise value is exposed to companies that have this dependency risk, financial risk. And so I think that's maybe to frame the discussions in the breakout room and for today is to discuss, to go a bit deeper into what we mean by dependencies. What kind of impacts are we seeing? The point on spatial data sets, how do we really build the data capability to monitor these? At which level? And then finally, where do they apply? Do they apply for the commercial bank? We'll have, I think, NatWest later today also talking to us. Or are we talking about the big pension funds? To whom are these risks really relevant? Because a lot of them might not show at the level of equity markets. So if I invest in Glencore, do I really, by the way, I'm Romanian, do I really care that they maybe destroyed a UNESCO site in Romania? I don't know how, global equity markets would react to a small Romanian, natural heritage site, right? But if they do it, for example, for the Amazon, I don't know, maybe people have some, cognitive distance into how do they react to the different locations. So we need to, I think, discuss these angles, but also importantly, build the data systems and data infrastructure that allows us to monitor all of these things and build that, I think, cognitive awareness that if something happens, even in a location that we don't naturally care about, you build the pressure points, you build the investor action, you get the pension funds, the banks, and you understand who finances that particular operation that might do damage. Is it the local commercial bank, or is it the pension fund directly, or is it the government itself? And so then you know that your pressure point is either a sovereign bond or commercial bank loan or pension fund direct investment. These are all, I think, investor action angles that we need to understand better. So if I can leave you with this slide right here. What I think was really striking is that, so this green line here is the financial sector. You have a lot of industries, so companies that care about at different levels about biodiversity, but the financial sector is the one that cares least at this stage, at least the banking sector. You have a whole bunch of US commercial banks as well as Chinese banks worldwide that just do lending with no types of criteria attached to it. And so as much as the financial sector currently talks about biodiversity, it doesn't yet show that they have a firm grip on it. And so I hope the TNFD and other initiatives will actually spur this type of investor action. I think I've gone a bit over time, but I'm grateful we're having this discussion. Thank you so much for your attention. I will circulate the study, and if you'd like to talk to us, we are building more and more data sets, and I'd love to work with you. Thank you so much. So I think we now have